Mornings after 60 have a rhythm of their own. The quiet, the ritual, the comfort of doing things just as you've always done them. Maybe you wake to the sound of birds outside your window, or the gentle hum of a ceiling fan that's been in that same spot for decades. You take a deep breath, stretch your arms, and begin the same sequence that has started your days for years, almost without thinking. It's automatic, almost sacred. But lately, something feels off. You can't quite place it. A fog that lingers longer than it used to. A name on the tip of your tongue that takes a few extra seconds to find. The energy that once carried you easily through the morning now fades too soon. You tell yourself it's normal, that this is just what getting older feels like. But deep down, something doesn't sit right. Because you're not sick. You're not in pain. You're just not as sharp. Not as steady. And no one seems to have an answer. But here's the unsettling truth. Sometimes, it isn't age. Sometimes, it's something hiding in plain sight, woven into your most ordinary habits. Something so familiar, so harmless seeming, that you'd never question it. Doctors have been quietly studying a daily behavior that millions of seniors do without a second thought, and what they've found is alarming. It's not a disease. It's not genetics. It's a small, almost invisible act that's quietly changing the way your brain functions over time. And the most surprising part? It's part of your morning, the very moment that's supposed to give you peace, energy, and focus. So before we uncover what it is, pause for a moment. Think about your mornings. What's the first thing you do? What's the small comfort you never skip? That's where the answer lies. And before we go deeper, hit that like button and subscribe, because the truth we're about to reveal could reshape how you start your day, and maybe protect your memory for the years ahead. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how one innocent morning habit, something millions of people over 60 do every single day without even thinking, is quietly working against your brain. It's not the big, dramatic choices that usually cause the most harm. It's the small, routine ones. The ones that feel harmless. The ones that have been part of your life for decades. And that's exactly what makes this so dangerous. It hides in plain sight, disguised as something comforting and familiar. You've probably done it this very morning, maybe even while watching this video, believing it helps you wake up or feel more alert. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if that same ritual is actually draining your brain's energy, slowing your mental response, and making it harder for you to stay focused throughout the day? Doctors and neuroscientists are beginning to uncover the subtle ways this daily routine affects how the brain manages chemicals linked to memory, clarity, and emotional balance. Over time, this tiny act can weaken the brain's natural rhythm, the very system that helps you stay sharp, recall names, and process new information quickly. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, so slowly that you don't even notice the shift until one day you realize things that used to feel easy, concentration, decision-making, remembering why you entered a room, suddenly feel harder. But here's the hopeful part. Just as easily as this habit begins to harm, it can also be reversed. That's right, your brain is far more resilient than you've been led to believe. With one small change, you can help restore your mental clarity, stabilize your energy, and rebuild the focus you thought was lost to age. And the best part? It doesn't require any medication, expensive supplements, or complicated routines. It's a simple shift, something you can do tomorrow morning, and it could make all the difference. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to start your mornings the right way for a sharper, stronger, and healthier mind, one that feels awake, balanced, and truly alive again. Howard, 72, spent most of his life as an engineer in Oregon, a man who believed in precision, systems, and logic. Even in retirement, that mindset shaped his mornings. Every day began exactly the same: the low whistle of the kettle, the scent of freshly ground beans, and the first sip of hot coffee before the sun had fully climbed over the pine trees outside his window. No breakfast, no rush, just that warm mug in his hand as he scrolled through the morning headlines, checking the news before the world really woke up. It was his ritual, a quiet moment of control in a life that had finally slowed down. Howard was proud of his independence. He lived alone by choice, took care of his home, paid his bills on time, and never missed a doctor's appointment. He still drove his old pickup to the hardware store, still fixed things around the house himself. To anyone else, he seemed like the perfect picture of healthy aging. But lately, something felt off. It started small, misplacing his glasses more often, forgetting why he'd walked into a room, losing his train of thought mid-conversation. He laughed it off, told friends, "That's just what happens when you hit your 70s." But deep down, it bothered him. He'd find himself rereading the same paragraph in the newspaper because it wouldn't sink in. Sometimes he'd sit at his kitchen table and feel slow, like his mind was half a step behind his body. The clarity that once defined him as an engineer, sharp recall, methodical thinking, focus under pressure, now flickered in and out like an old light bulb. He began writing reminders on sticky notes, double-checking locks, repeating phone numbers aloud to make sure he didn't forget them. It wasn't alarming enough to see a doctor, but it was enough to make him uneasy. Howard blamed it on age, or maybe just retirement boredom. He never thought to question his morning routine, the one thing that had always grounded him. He didn't realize that the very ritual he believed kept him alert and stable might actually be chipping away at his mental sharpness, one morning at a time. Howard's mornings had always carried the weight of ritual. The sound of his old kettle beginning to whistle, the comforting click of the kitchen light switch, and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans marked the rhythm of his dawn. The sun would barely be rising above the Oregon pines, pale light cutting through the mist that hovered just outside his window. At 72, this quiet hour was the only time that truly felt his own. He'd shuffle into the kitchen in his wool slippers, humming softly, reach for the tin canister labeled Colombian roast, and fill the pot like he had every morning for decades. That first cup wasn't just coffee, it was routine, memory, and identity all brewed into one. Howard had started drinking it early in life, back when he worked as an engineer designing irrigation systems across rural towns. Mornings back then meant deadlines and precision. A mug of black coffee was the bridge between exhaustion and performance, between sleep and sharpness. It wasn't something he questioned. And even after retirement, when the world no longer demanded he rush, his body still did. Coffee had become the first decision of every day, the one constant he could control. He'd stand by the window, cup in hand, watching the steam twist upward as the world woke up outside. The habit comforted him, anchoring his sense of normalcy. But lately, something had begun to unsettle that peace. The sharp alertness he once felt was gone. In its place came a fleeting burst of energy that faded into heaviness, a dull fatigue that made the hours blur together. His focus had started to waver. He'd read the newspaper and forget half of what he'd just seen. Conversations trailed off before he could remember his next word. His wife used to laugh about it before she passed, calling it senior moments, but now, alone, the silence after forgetting something felt colder. He brushed it off for years, telling himself everyone lost a little sharpness with age. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy thought that his mind was somehow slipping through his fingers. He began writing things down on sticky notes, reminders, grocery lists, people to call, but even those sometimes disappeared beneath piles of others. It was as if his brain had lost its structure, and no matter how early he woke or how strong the coffee, the clarity never came. Then one morning, when the fog outside mirrored the one in his head, something shifted. As he scrolled through the day's headlines on his tablet, a small link caught his eye, nothing flashy, just a quiet warning tucked between the usual noise. This one common morning habit could be damaging your brain over time. He almost ignored it. After all, the internet was full of exaggerated claims meant to scare people his age. But there was something in that phrasing, common habit, over time, that struck a chord. He tapped it, more out of boredom than belief. The article began simply, describing how the human brain followed natural cycles of wakefulness and rest, each one guided by delicate hormonal cues. It spoke of cortisol, the morning hormone, that surged after waking, signaling alertness and helping the brain transition from sleep to focus. Howard skimmed casually, until one line made him pause. When you artificially stimulate your brain before it finishes this natural cycle, you slowly teach it to stop waking up on its own. He frowned. Artificially stimulate, what did that mean? He scrolled further. The examples were common things: bright screens, high doses of sugar, and caffeine consumed too soon after waking. He stopped reading. His eyes went back to the half-empty mug on the table. The steam curled in the air, then vanished. For the first time, he really looked at it, not with affection, but suspicion. Could his morning comfort actually be part of the reason he felt so foggy? The article explained that when caffeine entered the system before the natural cortisol cycle had finished, it confused the body's chemistry. Instead of letting the brain rely on its built-in rhythm, it forced stimulation from the outside. Over time, the body learned to depend on that external jolt, and the internal system weakened. Howard felt his pulse quicken. He had always trusted coffee as his ally, not his enemy. The thought unsettled him. He continued reading, now slower, taking in every line, how years of this habit could alter blood flow to the brain, how it might amplify stress hormones, how it dulled the very mechanisms that helped protect focus and memory. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the cup as if seeing it for the first time. The logic fit too well. The jittery mornings, the mid-afternoon fatigue, the growing dependence, he had laughed about needing just one more cup for years, but maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe it was a warning his body had been whispering. He stood, walked to the sink, and poured the rest of his coffee down the drain. The smell lingered in the air, rich and bittersweet. He washed the cup slowly, hands trembling just slightly. As the water rushed over the ceramic, he found himself remembering little things, how his father had done the same thing every morning, how his colleagues used to joke that they couldn't function without their brew, how none of them had ever questioned it. It was tradition, comfort, culture, but maybe not wisdom. He sat again at the table, the quiet stretching around him like a thought too big to finish. His kitchen clock ticked steadily, each second a small reminder that time itself didn't stop for realizations like these. He thought about how long he'd been doing this, 40 years, maybe more. Every day, the same ritual, the same beginning. And now, to learn that it might have been quietly teaching his brain to depend, to weaken, to slow, it was like finding out an old friend had been deceiving him without meaning to. He rubbed his forehead, trying to remember when it had all started, when he began waking up needing the coffee, not wanting it. When it stopped being a choice and became a necessity. The truth was hard to face. Somewhere along the way, his morning ritual had stopped serving him and started controlling him. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, sunlight cutting through in streaks of gold. He watched the light move across the counter, across the empty space where his mug had been. And in that silence, Howard understood that what he'd uncovered wasn't just a bad habit. It was a small, invisible pattern that had rewritten the way his mind functioned, one sip at a time. The realization settled in slow and heavy, filling the quiet space of the room. He had spent years believing he was starting his mornings the right way, only to learn that beneath the comfort of routine, something deeper had been quietly unraveling. The mistake wasn't loud or obvious. It didn't announce itself. It hid behind the comfort of a daily ritual, one that seemed harmless until it wasn't. And as he sat there, the smell of coffee fading into the air, Howard couldn't escape the thought that the most dangerous habits weren't the ones you feared, they were the ones that felt the safest. The morning began like any other, sunlight easing through the blinds, a faint chill still clinging to the air. Howard shuffled into the kitchen, slippers dragging softly against the tiled floor. He felt a slight tension behind his eyes, the kind that usually disappeared after his first cup of coffee. He poured it automatically, hand steady but heart oddly restless. The smell filled the kitchen, familiar and comforting, yet something in him felt off, as if the air was thinner, the light too bright. He sat by the window, opened his newspaper, and tried to focus. But the words blurred. He blinked, frowned, and read the same sentence again. Still nothing. The story slipped from his mind like water through his fingers. He set the paper down, rubbing his temples. A soft dizziness rolled through him, followed by a wave of anxiety that made his chest tighten. He had never been prone to panic, but this was different. His pulse raced, not from fear of something external, but from a deep, unsettling sense that his body was out of sync. He tried to steady his breathing, but even that felt forced. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the coffee again, taking a slow sip, hoping it would calm him. It didn't. If anything, the unease deepened. By mid-morning, he noticed another oddity. His pill box still sat on the counter, untouched. He stared at it in confusion. The morning medications he'd taken religiously for years, blood pressure, heart, memory support, all untouched. He couldn't remember why. Had he been distracted? Had he simply forgotten? The realization hit him like a cold wave. It wasn't just the newspaper he'd lost track of. It was time. A whole part of his morning had vanished. When Linda came into the kitchen, she saw the look on his face, distant, pale, confused. "Howard," she said softly, setting down her mug, "are you all right?" He hesitated, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a bit lightheaded," he muttered. "Didn't sleep great." But she wasn't convinced. She watched him closely as he rubbed his forehead again, eyes unfocused, lips moving as if replaying a conversation in his mind that he couldn't quite finish. Later that afternoon, as he sat slumped on the couch, Linda's worry grew. "You've been forgetting things lately," she said quietly. "Maybe we should call Dr. Andrews." He wanted to brush it off, but the tremor in her voice made him stop. He nodded, though the thought of seeing a doctor filled him with dread. When they arrived at the clinic, he sat under the fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic making his unease worse. Dr. Andrews, a calm man with kind eyes, listened patiently as Linda described the morning, his confusion, the missed medication, the anxiety. After a long pause, the doctor asked, "Howard, what do you usually eat before your coffee?" Howard frowned. "Eat? I don't. I've been having my coffee first thing for years. Helps me wake up." Dr. Andrews nodded slowly, jotting something down. "That habit," he said carefully, "might be doing more harm than you think." Howard's brows furrowed. How could coffee do that? The doctor leaned forward, speaking gently but firmly. "When you drink caffeine on an empty stomach, it triggers a surge in cortisol, your body's main stress hormone. That rush can make you feel alert for a short while, but it also tells your body it's in a state of stress. Over time, those spikes exhaust your system, making you more prone to anxiety, lightheadedness, and confusion." Linda's hand tightened around Howard's. "But what about his memory lapses?" she asked softly. Dr. Andrews nodded again. "That's part of it. Caffeine on an empty stomach also interferes with how your brain regulates glucose, the fuel it needs to think clearly. When blood sugar drops after those spikes, your brain struggles to stay focused. That's when forgetfulness, irritability, and fatigue appear. It's not dementia," he added reassuringly, "but if ignored, it can mimic some of its early symptoms." Howard sat in stunned silence. The words hit him harder than he expected. All this time, he had thought coffee was his morning cure. Instead, it had quietly been the trigger for the very fog he was fighting. He thought back to his racing heart, the tremor in his hands, the empty pillbox, each one now fitting into a pattern he hadn't seen before. Dr. Andrews leaned back. "The good news is, this is reversible. Try eating something light before your coffee, oatmeal, eggs, even a slice of toast. Give your body real fuel before you add caffeine. And maybe wait an hour after waking. Let your natural alertness rise before you reach for stimulation." As they left the clinic, Howard felt a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that it wasn't the onset of something irreversible, shame that such a small habit could have caused so much distress. Linda slipped her arm around his. "We'll fix this," she said softly. "Tomorrow, breakfast first." That night, Howard couldn't sleep easily. He replayed the day over and over, the panic, the confusion, the doctor's words echoing in his mind. He had always believed that aging was about slowing down gracefully, but now he saw it differently. Sometimes, it wasn't the years that dulled you, it was the habits you never questioned. And in that quiet moment, he realized that healing his mind might begin not with medicine, but with a simple change in the order of his morning. The next morning, Howard woke before the alarm, the early light just beginning to stretch across the curtains. He sat up slowly, remembering the doctor's calm voice from the day before. His old instinct pulled him toward the kitchen, to the familiar hum of the coffee maker, but he stopped himself midway. For the first time in years, he hesitated. Instead, he filled a glass of water and drank it slowly. The water was cool and grounding, washing away the morning dryness that always seemed to blur his thoughts. It was a small thing, but it felt different, intentional. He stood there, glass in hand, and thought about what Dr. Andrews had said. His body had its own rhythm, a natural way of waking up that he'd been overriding for decades. Today, he would let it work as it should. He reached for a banana and a small container of yogurt, something Linda always kept stocked. She peeked into the kitchen, surprised to see him eating before the coffee pot was even turned on. "Who are you, and what have you done with my husband?" she teased gently. He smiled, the tension from yesterday already beginning to fade. "Just trying something new," he said, half grinning. After breakfast, Howard sat by the window with his water and waited. The smell of coffee filled the air, rich and familiar, but this time it didn't feel like a crutch, it felt like a reward waiting patiently for its turn. He took a deep breath, watching the morning light flicker across the garden. 4 years, he had thought his tiredness and forgetfulness were simply signs of aging. Now, as his body adjusted naturally, he began to feel something subtle shift. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that, like fog lifting slowly from a lake. By the second week, he started to notice patterns he hadn't seen before. His mornings felt smoother, his thoughts more organized. He didn't lose track of his keys as often. When he read the newspaper, the words stayed with him. The anxiety that had once simmered under his skin began to quiet down. He still loved his coffee, but it no longer owned him. Instead of the sharp jolt he used to crave, he now enjoyed its warmth, the gentle aroma, the familiar comfort, the slow sip rather than the desperate gulp. Linda noticed it too. "You seem lighter," she said one morning as he moved around the kitchen, humming softly. "I don't think I've seen you this calm in years." He chuckled. "Maybe I just needed to start the day with food instead of fuel." They both laughed, but deep down, he meant it. That small shift, those first 30 minutes of patience, that glass of water, that handful of nuts or banana, had changed everything. He realized how often he'd ignored the simple signals his body tried to send. The dizziness, the racing thoughts, the fatigue, they weren't random. They were messages, quiet warnings he'd mistaken for age. Now, with each passing day, those symptoms faded a little more. His mornings began to feel peaceful again, not like a rush to keep up with his body's decline, but a moment to align with it. One afternoon, Howard sat in his workshop, tinkering with an old clock that hadn't worked in years. As he carefully adjusted the gears, he thought about the irony of it, how something so small and routine as changing the order of his morning could bring everything else back into rhythm. Just as the clock ticked back to life, he smiled to himself. It wasn't magic or medicine that made him feel younger, it was awareness. By the end of the month, even his doctor noticed the difference. His blood pressure was steadier, his focus sharper. "Whatever you're doing," Dr. Andrews said, flipping through his notes, "keep at it." Howard simply nodded, knowing it wasn't a complicated formula, just respect for his body's design. He now woke each morning with quiet gratitude. The glass of water came first, followed by a small bite to eat, and only then, the slow ritual of his coffee. Each step felt like an act of self-respect, a conversation with his body instead of a command. He no longer rushed toward stimulation. He allowed energy to rise naturally, gently, the way it was meant to. For Howard, that single shift didn't just restore focus, it returned something deeper, trust in himself. He no longer feared the fog or the forgetfulness. He knew how to meet them head-on. And as he sipped his coffee, now a friend, not a master, he realized that age wasn't the enemy after all. It was simply an invitation to pay attention. What surprised me most while researching this is how common it really is. Nearly every senior I spoke with, neighbors, friends, even relatives, had the same exact morning pattern. They'd wake up, shuffle to the kitchen, pour that first cup of coffee, and start their day on autopilot. It's such a familiar ritual that no one ever questions it. Coffee first, food later. Maybe a sip of water if they remember. It feels harmless, comforting, even. But what's astonishing is how that one sequence can quietly rewrite the way your brain functions over time. I remember sitting with one woman in her late 60s who told me, "I don't even feel alive until my first cup." She laughed, but behind the laugh was something else, a kind of dependency we've all learned to normalize. And when I began asking doctors and nutritionists what that really means, they all said the same thing. The brain doesn't wake up hungry for caffeine, it wakes up hungry for fuel. Before any stimulant, it needs glucose, hydration, and oxygen to perform its morning reset. Skip that, and the body learns to push harder, burning energy it doesn't have, creating a constant low-grade fatigue that too many seniors mistake for aging. The science was shocking, but the simplicity of the fix was even more so. Just giving your brain what it needs before the caffeine, something as basic as water, a small snack, even 10 minutes of natural light, completely changes how that caffeine interacts with your system. Doctors explained it like this: imagine trying to start a car with no oil in the engine. It might run, but you're grinding the gears, shortening its life without realizing it. That's what happens when caffeine hits an empty system. It forces alertness instead of supporting it. And here's what's truly eye-opening: almost no one talks about this. The headlines focus on the dangers of too much coffee or the benefits of quitting caffeine, but the real danger lies in when and how you drink it. Seniors, in particular, are more sensitive to cortisol changes and blood sugar drops, so that first empty cup moment in the morning can trigger a chain reaction that affects focus, balance, and even emotional stability throughout the day. As I kept digging, I saw the same pattern in study after study, story after story. It wasn't about demonizing coffee, it was about timing, rhythm, and awareness. One researcher said, "Your morning routine is either training your brain to thrive or teaching it to crash." And that line stuck with me, because it's not dramatic, it's true. The smallest choices, repeated daily, become the invisible architecture of your health. That's why this next part matters so much. Because once you understand why this happens, you realize just how much control you still have. You don't need to give up coffee or make radical lifestyle changes. You just need to realign your mornings with what your brain naturally expects: fuel first, caffeine later. It's such a simple shift, but for so many seniors, it's the difference between feeling foggy and feeling fully alive. If this story opened your eyes to how the smallest daily habits can protect your brain and preserve your independence, take a moment right now, don't wait, to subscribe to Life After 60 Stories. Every week, we share real stories just like Howard's, true experiences that reveal how ordinary routines can shape your health, your memory, and your future in ways most people never realize. That single click means you'll never miss the kind of life-changing tips that can keep you alert, confident, and thriving well into your later years. Think about someone you care about: a spouse, a friend, a neighbor who still starts their day with nothing but a cup of coffee. You've seen them do it 100 times, brushing it off as harmless. But deep down, you now know how much that simple act might be costing them. Share this video with them. It's such a small gesture, but it could help them rediscover clarity, focus, and the sense of calm that comes from a healthy, well-fed brain. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for someone we love isn't a big intervention. It's sharing one piece of knowledge that changes everything. You see, the beauty of Howard's story isn't just about coffee, it's about awareness. About realizing that every small decision adds up. Most people spend their mornings rushing through routines, never noticing how each habit builds the foundation for their day. But you can be different. You can take control of those first moments after waking, and decide what kind of energy, focus, and balance you want to carry with you. Subscribing ensures you keep learning, keep growing, and keep finding ways to protect what matters most: your mind, your independence, your story. So go ahead, tap that subscribe button now. Think of it as a promise to yourself that you'll keep investing in your well-being one story at a time. And if you found a bit of hope, a bit of truth, or a reminder that change is always possible, don't keep it to yourself. Hit share. Someone out there needs to hear this right now. Remember this: every morning choice shapes your brain's future. It's never too late to rewrite your story, to take back control, and to feel sharp again. Howard's journey proved that transformation doesn't require massive effort. It just starts with awareness and a willingness to try something new. So tomorrow morning, when the world is still quiet and the coffee pot hums softly in the kitchen, pause for a moment. Drink your water. Eat something small. Give your body the head start it deserves. Because staying sharp isn't about luck, it's about daily intention. You already have everything you need to protect your mind and your vitality. Stay sharp, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.